So really my methodology for building anything is you got to think from the user. Like, what's the problem I'm solving? What's the current option? And how do I 10x the result? Like, how do I come up with something that's so different? And you think through and design the user journey before anything. You don't code anything. The last thing you guys need is a coder or a developer, right? So like, and you think of the, iPhone or Android, like you're building mobile apps, you're building SaaS apps, design it, right? Like design this button and this screen and this experience and this result, and really try to put yourself deep in the weeds on this is what it would look like and feel like and accomplish or not accomplish. And here's problems. Here's where I would lose the user potentially before you spend a dime on building anything. Because for, under $5,000, you can design a great app.
On this episode of Establishing Your Empire, I'm excited to host Michael Devellano, a dynamic figure in the tech industry with over 25 years of experience. As a founder, executive, and investor, Michael has left his mark on numerous technology startups. He is currently the founder and CTO of Opps.ai. Michael is not just a business leader, but also an author, with his latest book, Form Your Own Pack, exploring the power of collaboration in the business world. This draws inspiration from a unique Japanese business model. He's also the driving force behind the Founders Pack community, which offers a platform for networking and growth. In this episode, Michael shares his profound insights on business strategy, the role of AI and blockchain in education, and offers valuable advice for aspiring entrepreneurs. This is a must listen for anyone wanting to leverage the exciting opportunities in the evolving world of technology and AI to their advantage. You're listening to the Establishing Your Empire show, a podcast that inspires entrepreneurs, creatives, and future business owners to pursue their passions, grow their organizations, and build their empire. My name is Daran Herrman, and creatively, I'm best known for my photography. But business-wise, my claim to fame is growing a company from $15K per month in online sales to breaking the $1 million a month barrier. And I'm sitting down with interesting people to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how they have established their empires. All right, I got Michael here on the Establishing Your Empire podcast. Thank you so much for coming to Austin, Texas to do this with me.
No problem. I'm excited we finally got to get this rolling. I'm in and out of Austin. As you know, we have a house here in South Lamar, and I feel I don't spend enough time here. Whenever I come back, I'm like, I need to spend more time in Austin. So this is a good reason.
Austin will do that to you. Actually, That's what happened to me in 2008, and I ended up moving here. I was like, why am I not here? This feels like the place to be. I remember last time we were kind of messaging on WhatsApp, you were at the World Cup.
Was at the World Cup.
Actually, let's diverge slightly.
Yeah,
I don't usually do this, but why don't you give that experience a little bit?
So strange thing is my sister and her family moved to Qatar, and my brother-in-law works on the World Cup stadiums, the Olympic stadiums. His company actually established, I guess their head office in Qatar. And it's really interesting over there. There's obviously a lot of stories about what it was going to be like. It was phenomenal.
Oh yeah, no, I've been to Qatar or Qatar. I only did it depends. Even on the airplane they're like, they say it both ways. You're like,
I know it goes back and forth. I think it's like whoever you're talking to at the moment, but
right. And we did a 24-hour layover while going on to Kenya.
Okay,
so we stayed on purpose.
Yeah,
and had a phenomenal experience.
It's a great place for a lot of reasons, right? It's obviously a Muslim country.
Mm-hmm.
It's odd for people because it's a royal family. It's an emir, right? And it's a country of like 3 million people, and there's only like 300 Qatari.
Oh, right.
Like
really?
300,000, yeah.
Yeah.
It's when I say 300,000
yeah, right.
of the 3 million are Qatari. Everybody else is an expat. And it's obviously a lot of people go there for the oil business. He went there from Canada to set up their factory and run their factory. So it was really interesting, or run the plant that they already built. He had built the plant in Canada. So he was working on the World Cup stadiums, and what a phenomenal place, because like you have 8 stadiums in one city and you can just bounce within 15 minutes to different games. It was really great. And I'd never been to the World Cup, but it was a great opportunity to go over there, see my nephews who were kind of growing fast, and they're now 15 and gonna be, or 14 and gonna be 15, going on 16. So
wow, well that would be phenomenal. And Qatar, Qatar, uh, I think it'd be much different living there than visiting for a day or two,
for
right?
sure.
Because as a lot of cities are like that, and a lot of countries are like that
Totally.
too. But so let's dive in. Why don't you give us a kind of the my least favorite question, but I think it is important, is just a little bit, your background. Give me like so people listening kind of know like who's the guest here today.
I'm a reformed Canadian. I escaped the Maple Curtain. I wanted, greener pastures like many Canadians that are ambitious and want to try new things and have more opportunity. And I was kind of going back and forth for different opportunities in the US. The last 13 years, I kind of started really building other people's stuff. So I just really developed my own process after working in kind of the wireless and software space for building apps. And, I was in the wireless arena before we had fast networks, good devices, and any operating system. So we were doing Scotch tape and glue, and it was really painful. And then in 2007, the iPhone came out, and I'm like, oh, this is super easy. This is like way easier. This like opens up opportunity. So I really just started building other people's stuff, like putting together teams, designers, and developing apps. And then software as a service was a natural extension. And then, I got to a point where sometimes those projects are really tough and you build cool stuff and people don't do the right things with them. So I was like, you know what? I had this other thing that was also going on, which was Salesforce. And it was actually Motorola, when I kind of broke out from my corporate-y type role, said, hey, you should look at this. We don't understand it, but I think you will. And it was Salesforce, but their development environment. So the first project I had was something called Portable Intelligence. And we ended up building iPad front end and Salesforce backend product that was like a CPQ catalog type product. And we won top 5 at their developer competition in 2010. That's really how I kind of broke out on my own and started building everyone's stuff. And then I kind of started doing more specific Salesforce stuff because it was like 75% done. You have to go from zero. So it was kind of interesting. Got into more automation. And then I wrote my first book then, which was Automate and Grow. And that was really like saying, I'm seeing over and over people screw this up. Building, buying, customizing technology, what do you do? And this really just said, here's a methodology to do it. And that's kind of the last 12, 13 years. And well, let's call it 10. And then we'll talk about the last 3.
Well, I actually had a quick question on this.
Sure.
It's like, so obviously you saw the App Store, even the iPhone, not even the App Store yet, because they launched kind of before a lot of that was out.
Yep.
And then Salesforce. Why do you think you saw opportunity to those environments? And then is there any areas that you're seeing an opportunity for now? Like say somebody is
Absolutely.
your age back then, 20 years ago when this stuff happened, I think that's really wonderful. And technology is at such a fast pace that there's opportunities constantly happening.
And I think a lot of people are overwhelmed right now with this thing called artificial intelligence. And they think, oh, it's going to eat my lunch. But we always think that, right? And you have kind of like this reflex Luddite, response to it. Like, let's throw cogs in the machine and break it. No, there's huge opportunity for anyone that understands what we had in 2010 with iOS and the App Store, and then later Android and their Play Store. It's happening again, right? Like you've got this thing called GPT, not even Chat GPT. You have GPT, which is a large language model. And what you need to do if you're an entrepreneur looking to build stuff is you got to think of, okay, how do I take advantage of GPT and Chat GPT the same way I would iOS and the iPhone? And that's what it boils down to. Like they announced, I think yesterday, their new developer framework, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
You can build plugins and skills. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's the same thing as building an app for that other platform. And I think you should be excited by that.
Yeah, a brand new ecosystem, kind of like the Shopify App Store, the iPhone App Store, the Google Play Store. Now we have the, it's 3.0 or whatever we want to call it.
Totally.
So what if you're not a programmer? How would you get any type of advancements or be able to build or be able to make this work for you?
Yeah, great question. Actually, my first book, I kind of talk about that. So really, Automate and Grow, I say you need 4 plans in any business or any venture. And you need a traffic and conversion plan, you need a sales playbook, and you need a customer success roadmap, and then you need a digital product plan. And that title might change, but it's the same concept, right? So really my methodology for building anything is you got to think from the user. Like, what's the problem I'm solving? What's the current option? And how do I 10x the result? Like, how do I come up with something that's so different? And you think through and design the user journey before anything. You don't code anything. The last thing you guys need is a coder or a developer, right? So like, and you think of the, iPhone or Android, like you're building mobile apps, you're building SaaS apps, design it, right? Like design this button and this screen and this experience and this result, and really try to put yourself deep in the weeds on this is what it would look like and feel like and accomplish or not accomplish. And here's problems. Here's where I would lose the user potentially before you spend a dime on building anything. Because for, under $5,000, you can design a great app.
I mean, nowadays you have
less
Adobe
if you
XD,
want.
you have Figma,
Exactly.
but not even that, you have Canva,
Right.
where you can
Canva.
fake an app and
what you want, fake an
actually get the user feedback and journey. I think where some people get sideways is like, oh, it's not real, so then they don't take it as serious. But if you pretend that it's real and you go and launch it like it's real, and you tell people about it like it's real,
correct,
you could actually probably sell before building anything. And that's something I've learned. I just launched my startup, Real Market, and we have a whole great back end. But I'm like, you know what? I probably could have done a lot of this without building it.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think a little bit of that was just pride on my part. I've built a great network, and I don't want to let people. I want people to say, "Hey, Daran's doing awesome stuff."
For sure.
But I could have probably, especially I'm a design guy, so I could have probably faked it.
Yeah,
for the most
exactly.
part.
And I think you have to do that. So my new book, Form Your Own Pack, kind of takes some of those themes. Oh yeah,
Throw it
we'll
up
give
right
you
here,
that.
Form Your Own Pack.
So like the first part of it obviously tells, I want to build a community of people that have the same ethos as me. Not the same ideas necessarily, but the same ethos, right? And so the first part of this says, hey, here's a model of cooperation. There's this business model from history called the Japanese keiretsu that everybody's forgotten about. These are the positive characteristics. And some of the characteristics include these companies that would cooperate and send each other management and engineering talent to solve problems, right? But then the second part says we need the same approach to the future. We need a vision that we share of where technology in particular is going so that we're on the same page there. But then we all need to be able to pitch our ideas in 1 minute. We all need to be able to rapidly prototype products and then go talk to customers and investors immediately and build in public. And I think if we're on the same page that way, we all get more comfortable and deep into the intellectual part of design before build, because you can blow a lot of time and money developing stuff. So that's really the approach. I think you have to rapidly prototype, then talk to investors and customers, be comfortable with that, try to get some nominal money from both, and then build your thing if you can. Now, sometimes you can build quickly and it's getting easier to code, right? But coding's the last thing, right? I think people navigate to that because that's the thing they don't know.
Right, sure. And they think they need to fix that problem and then you go down the rabbit hole of spending a lot of time either finding a co-founder, which can be wonderful too, and we can go into that, or they start spending some money that probably could have been better spent on some ads or some swag or some marketing events or whatever it is, our design. Yeah.
Like make this, it's funny. I tell a couple stories in the book about the past, and one is General Magic. And I don't know if you know the story about General Magic, but so 1996, you had a couple things happen. It was the original Apple, and Steve Jobs left during the John Sculley era. So we all kind of know that story of conflict, and he went off and started Next Computers, which eventually became iOS and Mac OS, right? It's his Unix kernel that's the basis of everything today. But there was another company, and that other company, General Magic, went out and there was this trend around PDAs.
Right.
The personal digital assistant. We had these things called Palm Pilots that weren't connected to anything.
Right.
It was just a little device with a stylus, and you had this little script thing you would write, and you could play games and record data, but it wasn't wireless. So General Magic, what they did is they said, we're going to make the first wireless PDA device. So what was interesting about that was the first prototypes of it were paper and then a block of wood.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
so they could just play around with it.
And actually the Palm Pilot, the guy that created the Palm Pilot, which was a huge success at the time, walked around with a block of wood in his pocket and would pretend to use it before they ever built it. So you think of like, you have much better tools now. You're going to look a lot less silly than a guy walking around with a block of wood in your pocket.
That's amazing.
But it's the same concept, right? What's the feel? What's the look? What am I imagining? And you have to really go deep on that before you code. Flip it now, we have this other environment, right? We have, artificial intelligence. What you need to think of is magic, right? You need to think of the magic of asking for an outcome and what's the result. And that's what you got to start thinking of. We need a new framework because it's not all visual. Now it's like I'm expressing to, in this case, chatbots were terrible, right? If you used chatbots 6 years ago, it was like, this is a joke, right?
Yeah, it was
like,
annoying.
This is terrible. But then they made a product out of it by combining it with a large language model. Well, now you've got all this capability where it understands what you're asking. So now you got to think of, hey, if I just had like this magic gnome, in my case, he had a magic wolf, right? You had a magic wolf and you said to the wolf, I want this thing. How would you deliver it? Because now with the large language model, it'll understand what you're asking and you can teach it to understand other things. And I think the other thing is when you've been building SaaS, you're building APIs. So those APIs describe, today we're doing with pictures, we're doing with screens and mobile device screens and Chrome screens, right? So now you as a non-technical entrepreneur need to think of, if I was asking the magic wolf for a thing and it delivered to me, what calls against what API somewhere would deliver that thing? It's a weird.
It's like
thing
shopping.
To do.
It's like going shopping. Like I want this to interact with that to get me this end result, whatever that end result is. And I actually think it's wonderful because a lot of people don't even know how to interact with ChatGPT that well. Yeah. But even then, like ChatGPT is going to be the very broad sense. Like it might not. You might have to do very specific inputs to get the output you're looking for in your narrow environment.
Yeah.
And even just a layer on top of that, which a lot of companies are, is just some simple layer on top. And I know you're going deeper than that, but that could even work just doing that.
Well, you keep hearing this thing, which I think is so silly and premature. And everyone's like, oh, there's all these rapper startups. And I'm not like as in hip hop in, wrapping your interface around GPT. So it's like just another chat GPT. And I'm like, of course they're doing that. Yeah. Like you're missing the point. Maybe they're missing the point because they're just emulating the features that are already built. But what you need to really think of is the next phase of that. So, if I just build another chat bot that does exactly what ChatGPT does, okay, maybe you can brandish that as a wrapper. But what you're doing is you're taking non-technical founders and you're confusing them, right? You're missing the whole point. This is a platform. So what you need to do is you need to, as a non-technical founder, kind of go back to what I was saying. Imagine you have that magic wolf and you're asking it for whatever your wish is. Can GPT through ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT is the interface, like the mobile app. GPT is the large language model that interprets what you're asking and then gives a result. A lot of what's result today is just like more words or code, right? It's like, hey, can you write me a story? Yeah, sure. I wrote you a story. Can you write me a story in the voice of Hunter S. Thompson? Sure, I've read all of that too, right? Now what you got to do is, no, if I want you to do something, what would I have to connect to? What API would I build, buy, or own that would enable it to deliver more magic? And that's what you got to think of. It's a little more abstract. So what you're thinking of it is in terms of these words mean this. So I'll use a personal example.
Yeah, please.
So my current product that I'm building out is called Opps.ai, and it's a data marketplace. So if you have, data out there, people are like, oh, I can go search for lists, and I would use it. We use it for cold outreach to find new investors, customers, partners, right? But what if what questions would I ask it instead of using filters to search? What would I ask it? What different, 100 queries would I ask it, and it would interpret to get that same data or better? So that's how I create that other interface, which is chat. And it might be through ChatGPT building a plugin. It might be my own interface, which we call Valet, which is our own co-pilot. But the thing that's interpreting it is something like, or specifically GPT from OpenAI, right? The result though is I have to build something over here on the API that it understands. Because what the Copilot does is it reads my API and it knows if you say the word title and you want a new list, I call the list call on the API and I say the title is vice president. As opposed to me pushing buttons on a screen,
right,
and acting like a monkey in the cage,
right,
trying to get a
or
banana.
just browsing LinkedIn all day, trying to find people.
Right. Like I just want an outcome, and that's where you get magic. So that's what I'm kind of describing, right?
Yeah, and let's just go on a little deeper into what you're building there. Or that is, the idea is that, let's say you are creating a startup. One of the big pieces that you were kind of saying, it was, just to give a general term, is marketing and outreach and getting out there. This would be a way to quickly find the right people to talk to. That is maybe your customer segmentation.
Totally. And then you think of the next step of that, though.
Right.
Which is, what do I do with the data?
Yeah. So, okay, I got 1,000 people are exactly who I want to talk to. Now what?
Exactly. So, a lot of times we're downloading CSVs, which are, Excel files, but in a comma delimited format. Like if you're a marketer or even an SDR out there, or, sometimes founder, you're constantly creating, buying, uploading, downloading CSVs from different systems for marketing, sales, support. Kind of crazy. You have a concept of the customer in like 4 or 5 different systems at least in your company, right? Well, why am I doing that? That's silly. What the future is people that can envision, and this is what we're doing with Ops, is no, I don't just want a list of data. I want a campaign that's cold outreach to people I don't know, that are vice president of sales in e-commerce companies that have raised seed fund or Series A in the United States. My chatbot or ChatGPT interprets me saying, okay, here's the factors and here's the API calls on the Ops API, and it delivers the result. I have this many records. And I've created a campaign for you in Ops Plus. I've moved the data Ops Plus. By the way, it's really good at writing stuff, right? I've written you a 4-step email and put it in the campaign. Oh, by the way, you're going to need some branded domains. I registered those for you and I'm warming them up. Can you approve it?
The thing and the power of this is, this is like your assistant or, almost an employee that you can go and tell what to do, whether it's through your guys' tool or any tool out there. And I think that's where a lot of people miss the deal. It's great. Hey, that's right. Make your resume better. It's write a better email. I got all that. That's powerful. But the going next steps with, this, whether it's ChatGPT or the 1,000 other brands out there, is let's see how you can take half of your day out.
Totally.
Or not hire somebody.
Well, exactly. So I started thinking of this idea of a 5-person company. Peter Diamandis one-upped me, and he said, the next $1 billion startup will be a 3-person company.
Well, I mean, what was Instagram? I don't know, like 8 people, whatever it was. Yeah.
Right?
When they got sold for $1 billion to Facebook, right?
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
Even
crazy.
YouTube, really. Like,
right.
If you go back, and that's a long time ago, right? Now you have, you're seeing AI helping you co-pilot code, right? So if you're on GitHub and you're a developer, it's helping you write a bunch of code based upon what you want.
Or if you're like me, that kind of understands code but doesn't really write it, just because I've been around for so long.
Yeah,
I just can ask the right questions and then copy and paste.
Exactly. It writes you content that you need to get attention with. It, there's all these things that you're trying to use this horde of what we're seeing as AI tools. So the future is the ability, with Ops, we're trying to make it so that, why am I making all these distinct systems? Those are just skills in the API. Mm-hmm. So where instead of me building 6 apps, I'm going to build 6 skills. And there's layers of that, but really it begins with you thinking of that magic request and the outcome. And then behind the scenes, it's up to you and the technical team. So instead of designing, you still have to design screens right now. I think that's important. You still have to design.
When you mean screens, you mean like a user interface?
User experience and user interface, right? However, now you have this new interface, which is chat.
Right. And I think people like chat to interface. I think they like to ask questions. Yeah. And I think the next version is going to be audio, which is the same thing. Just taking audio to text. But I think that's going to be really powerful just to be able to interact that way.
So just to complete the thought on that, if you're a non-technical entrepreneur, your job is to think of the new product interface and that experience. The old way you were thinking about it was pictures and screens, and you probably still have to do about that. But now you got to think in terms of, hey, if I had a user that showed up and they asked 100 different things that kind of mean the same thing, which is the outcome I want to deliver, what are those questions? How do I parse out the things that are the same, right? They're fields in a database, they're requests against an API. And that's what your team builds, right? They're building an API already for it to interface with that new interface. So I think if people can get their head wrapped around that, it's a little esoteric right now, but people are going to get really good about thinking about conversations, like conversational interface. That's really what I think it's called.
And do you think so that this? I mean, I assume that the web as we know it will kind of almost change a little bit to where. And when you went, by the way, let's back up for a quick second.
Yeah, sure.
When you say API, you're just basically saying connecting from one system, database, whatever it is, one program, one company to another, just so in case somebody doesn't know what an API is.
So an API is an application programming interface.
Right.
And what that is a schema of, I've built this software with this database. So there's an application. It has an interface right now, which might be mobile. It might be web browser. And today that's what the browser-based application or the mobile app are talking to the API. We have a new interface. It's called ChatGPT or your own chat copilot. It's got an augmentation of GPT, not to say the large language model that's interpreting what the user's saying. And then you're teaching it, well, by the way, my API says these things, and this is what they mean. And that's called a swagger, right? So most of you probably don't even know this, but your development team, if they're good, they have an API and they have a swagger. That's how they made those other two things work. Now your job is to think of this other interface, the conversational interface, and how, here's the requests, and then figuring out those same calls. Because you can teach, like we have a copilot we're building called Valet, and it's built into Ops, and we just fed it our API and our swagger. And then we made some adjustments so that when I have all those user interfaces, it's calling the right thing, getting you the right result.
And we can even simplify this a little bit. Let's say you're we're talking about like you're looking to found a new company right now, and you're not technical. So there's a lot of things right now that you could go do. One, if you're saying, hey, your development team should be really good to build an API. Well, let's say you don't have one. There is, and Zapier might not be a good enough situation for this, but there is some companies out there that kind of connect the two. Or you just jump on Upwork, find yourself an API expert.
Yeah, for sure.
But beyond that,
why don't you? Dark alleys, though.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's a whole. If you're
not,
but if you're not able to hire well, then you're gonna have a tough time as being an entrepreneur. I think.
Well, I think what the problem is hiring without a plan. What I'm describing to you is. Yeah. What I do is create a document for yourself.
Yes.
That has those 100 terms.
I was about to go there. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Well, basically, I love it.
Don't hire anybody yet.
Is to back up to where you were saying is then before you do any of that, interface with ChatGPT or the other ones and say, hey, I'm looking to build this. What's my steps?
Yes.
And say, hey, I'm gonna need to hire that. And then also on the advice on hiring freelancers in general, whether you're using a third-party tool like Upwork or you're just trying to find somebody that's local, is give them a very small project first. See how their communication is.
Very true.
And then write the project plan like you were going to build it yourself.
Yeah.
And use these tools to help you write this.
Totally.
You don't need to sit down and think the whole thing through yourself. You can use these to bounce ideas off of.
Well, like my approach to that, and that was part of not to overemphasize the first book, was a digital product plan is not a spec document. It's that user experience. You then take it and think, well, this, in the case of user like interfaces like web or mobile, it's like, well, if I'm asking the user to fill in something that's their first name, that's a field. And understanding those concepts, right? You don't have to, you just break it down. You say, oh, this button does this.
Yeah, sure.
And now we're doing it with words, which seems like it's easier, but it's going to, be some complexity, right? But it's the same thing. Like if I put a request in, and sorry, not to divert it, but I don't think it's a spec document that you hand developers. It's big crayon pictures.
Sure. So, which can actually be, if you're super low tech, it could be you
So much
scribbling
easier
on a
too.
piece of paper
Exactly.
and setting photos. Now, I'm a design person, so I jump in Adobe XD, which is like Figma, and I get there and I wired it all up, you know, fake, you know, like, hey, this goes to there. But that's me. And and actually, I feel like I spend too much time doing that.
Maybe.
That if I wasn't super into my design, because I'll like get really serious about it, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm 4 days in on this thing. I should just move on.
I mean, I'm several months in on a project that is an app project right now, and thank God I am.
Right.
Right. Like it's totally wireframe still.
Yeah. Sure.
Right. And I think that if you start thinking in terms of these words mean this, and maybe you need someone to interpret what that means technically, like it's a field, it's a call on an API. Make sure the API is the description so it can be read. Okay. You probably need a technical person maybe, or you just get your head wrapped around it. It's like a code breaker, right? You're the code breaker. Like that's what you're building. Mm-hmm. It does something over here. There's actions and outcomes and triggers and actions, right? But that's software now. Now it's not just those UI experiences. But that's why I think if you just have a PowerPoint, which I don't use, I use Keynote, but if you use a Keynote or Canva to say, here's what I'm going to design. Here's all the screens of how they connect to each other without the design. It's just boxes, right? And then here's the chat experience. Here's 100 things that a user would ask for that I would want this outcome for. That's what I would do. And then you have that thing, and then you give it to a designer. You don't give it to a developer.
No, God, no.
Right? Then when the designer
you will actually get the boxes if you give it to the developer.
Yeah.
And they will love it. They will actually, this was the best project ever. Because it's just boxes.
Exactly. You hit it on the head, right? It's like, oh, you don't want those developers thinking too much except about how to make the thing that you want. Mm-hmm. So then it's just not fair to them. They're not designers.
Right.
They're not user experience designers. They're not visual designers. So if you hand them a document that says, this is what I'm thinking of, here's all the screens, here's all the chat conversation examples, they're going to understand, oh my God, I can build these things so it works. Usually. It's way closer than just hiring a developer and hoping they can build the whole thing. It doesn't work on anything. It won't work for conversations. It definitely won't work for mobile and SaaS.
Well, and one of the things is you're really just saying how a business plan should be done, whether it's this year or a long time ago. Now it's easier because you can actually visually tell the business that you want. Because if you started a company, let's just say you're like a real estate, you're buying and selling properties or something.
Yeah.
If you don't have a very clear plan what your end goal is, who's going to rent your place?
Right.
How does these places look? Yeah. Are these $500,000 places, $5 million, or $50,000 places? Right? If you kind of go to the end result first and then work backwards, you're actually going to have a much better, clearer idea of how to get there, and you're going to expedite the process to get there.
Yeah, I think you need to do that. You need that plan of some sort. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think my friend Sydney, who's here, and we were having this conversation before, and it's like, it's perfectly imperfect, right? You got to get it out, but it's better than doing nothing, right? Yeah. It's like you have to have a game plan and you have to be disciplined enough to write it out, think it through many times over before you ever code anything or build anything, right? So I think that's such a valuable thing. It'll save you time, money, and you can engage customers. It's like, well, I think my customer is this, right? Like we were selling ops before it existed. It was just like, you want this data? What do you want? Okay. Here's the data. Okay, they gave me money. Great. Okay. I'm like, this is really not fun or scalable.
Right.
Which is Reid Hoffman talks about this in Blitz scaling, like do things that don't scale.
Early on, absolutely.
Which I never understood. Now when you do it, you're like, oh, yeah, because then I understand the thing I got to build.
Well, and also, if it scaled really easily, somebody probably might have already built it before you. Maybe. Yeah, true. How do you get your first customer?
Opportunities start with data. And that's why, ops, which, Opps.ai is you go in, you say, my customer they're in this location, they have this title, they have this size of company, it's this industry, who's out there that looks like it? And then you have data. And data meaning like I have a bunch of records that match that avatar, and then I have to reach out to them. And for us, we reach out by cold email and LinkedIn. And you can do Twitter, which is actually very, very effective.
And when you say cold email, you literally don't know this person.
Yeah.
They haven't signed up.
Totally.
You're just hitting them out and see what happens.
And for ops, if you look at the way we kind of rough started, we started without a platform. We had no interface. We were just delivering data to people like a maniac. Like it's like, okay, I'll just assemble data for you because I have a lot of data. I was literally like reaching out to them saying, hey, here's something that is new. I'd like to give you free data. Can you give me feedback on the data? And people are willing to help you usually, and that's my ideal client. And people gave us money, and we gave them data. But it was really hard to keep giving them data without an interface. So at that point, it was like, okay, I better start building something.
But you did get the customers first.
Correct.
They got the buy-in of hey, like I actually do want what you're selling.
Exactly.
Or you're not even selling, but at that point you probably weren't even selling. Yeah. I want what you have. I want your wares.
The new selling.
Yeah. So the call to outreach is interesting because I think a lot of people struggle with that, and I think I'd be one person included. But if you're offering value, I think that's what I'm unpacking there is your cold outreach, but you're saying, hey, look, is this something you'd be interested in? Or can you give me some feedback?
I think this is where we all overthink this. And people are willing to help someone that's not perfect. So when we say perfectly imperfect, it applies to this, right? This is not perfect. I need someone tolerant, and I will give you something of value. The outcome will be, I promise you, I will give you something of value.
Yeah. And I mean, even in the Lean Startup book, he talks about like your early adopters, they actually don't want it perfect because then it's not new. They're not the early ones.
Yeah.
If you have this perfectly built product, they want to move on. And those are the people that you want all the feedback from early on because they're willing to have something not perfect.
Absolutely. And we have a very imperfect product right now with Opps.ai. Like we told people that right up front. I will give you this much data for free. I just ask you for honest and frank feedback on how I improve the data or the product. And we onboarded in 60 days using cold email and cold LinkedIn. We used our own data, 100 people in 60 days. And so we got like very valuable feedback that we have made changes to. And we have now a roadmap over the next 60 days of how we're going to go from where we are to what is going to be a pretty darn good product and a little differentiated.
And then do you fundraise then, or do you just build yourself? And I know you're probably a different situation than some people, but still, what's the game plan there, and what do you recommend?
Tempted to raise money for something, but
and I guess why wouldn't you would be another question. If you do you have some pitfalls there, stories, or any advice for people?
I don't know. Do you want the responsibility of taking people's money and then delivering a return? Do you want to give up equity? Do you have to give up equity? Is it more about scale or comfort? Like, so you go through all those decisions in your head. Like, I think the best book for this is Rand Fishkin, who I've talked to Rand before. He was actually on my previous podcast, Automate and Grow. And he wrote the book Lost and Founder. And he described, it's a great title. That's an amazing book. I highly, highly recommend it because he had kind of an emotional ending to his company Moz. And it's not that he was totally out of it, but he wasn't in the day-to-day. And it was almost like I felt really bad for him because he was so vulnerable, but he was really experiencing it. And he was sad about this, where he'd raised $60 million. He took his mother's marketing company, raised $60 million to build, Moz.
Moz used to be huge.
Huge, right? And then it capped out at only 60 million in revenue.
And if he didn't raise, it'd been amazing.
It would have been amazing.
Yeah.
But would he have also got there? And that's true. And what he talks about in that book is here's how the journey went. Here's how I raised money. Here's how my equity went to like nothing. And even though I built something that was cool, it was a disappointment. Like if you had a $60 million company, we would all be thrilled, right? And so his next company, Sparkloop, he said, I'm going to do it different. I'm going to take a little bit of money from friends and I'm going to grow it organically through the same method and deliver this other result. And I think he's much happier. So I think you have to understand there is another path, right? If you play this game, it's a blow up or die. scenario, right?
Yeah, I would say, am I trying to hit home runs here,
Exactly.
or just
That's what you're looking
trying
for.
to play the game?
Unicorns,
Yeah.
yeah. That's why the unicorns, they want $1 billion, valuation, and that's a unicorn, right? And a unicorn, guys, is a fabled creature.
Literally, it's what I mean. What it is,
right? It's a little bit of fantasy,
yeah.
But there's some reality. There's real money behind it, and your real objectives. But money can distort problems in those scenarios, so you have to be very, prepared to deal with. Oh yeah, well, we think this is working, but it's not, right? And that might kill the whole thing. Or, the other, and I talk about this in Form Your Own Pack. I look at the next generation of companies as wolves. Like wolves partner and pack together. If you look at the wolf, they're really a family. And people think there's an alpha and then a bunch of followers. Actually, wolf packs are family. And there's two alphas in a family. It's the male and the female, the mom and the dad, and the pups are the rest of the pack. And people don't realize that about a pack. But then what they do is they work together, they have different skills, and they'll take down bigger prey. And that's kind of what I'm proposing in Form Your Own Pack is let's think of this other way. Like, yes, money is important, but it's also, can you scale through community of customers, through partnerships, and a mastermind of advisors and investors? And maybe they're not Sequoia, right? Maybe it's not Excel or A16Z. Maybe it's just, no, we have some money. We've proven a sales process and we scale. And so I think that's the debate I'm going through, which is maybe we'll take on investor money, but it'll probably be close people we trust. They can be strategic and bring other skills or customers. And then I can scale because I've built my own sales playbook. I've built my own traffic and conversion plan. And that's really where we're at. Like, we might take on money, but I don't see it being necessarily venture money. Maybe, you never know, right?
So you have an interesting perspective that I would be similar because of my background, not because that's pretty much it. I come from like small businesses, come from a small town.
Yeah.
I started my first like real company, a brick and mortar store at 20. We got acquired a year later, and we exited by the time I was in college. The exit was negative cash because I wanted to leave town, but it was a great experience. It wasn't anything terrible, and I sold to somebody who used to be my manager and his dad, and it was a perfect. And they're killing it now too. And this is retail, so it's a lot of you got to be there. I couldn't move to Austin and have it. I knew exactly what to do to make it continue to grow, but and also did a bunch of other small businesses, retail at first, and then decided against that. But mine was always like revenue.
Right. Sure.
Business equals making money.
Wolves eat what they killed. Daran.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
That was my thing.
That's why I say the next generation are wolves, right? They're a pack that gathers resources and takes down bigger prey. Yes. But wolves eat what they kill. That means you got to get revenue.
Yeah, and that's been always my thing is I understand building for this grand future, the potential future.
Yeah.
I have a tougher time with it. So my thing is I have to have a little bit more clear goal of like, okay, this is how I actually get paid.
A to B.
This is how I get paid.
A to Z.
Who's going to pay me and how and why would they pay me? And I'm okay. I actually like that because I can show revenue. So maybe early, maybe not early, depending on the startup. Like even the startup we're working on now, like we have a very clear revenue way to get paid.
So I think that what you need is a balance.
Yeah, probably.
And so this is where, in part, I was a little selfish in writing Form Your Own Pack. Because Form Your Own Pack says, here's a model from history, and here's these interesting characteristics. Here's these giant corporations in Japan, and they have some really weird characteristics by US, American standards. They have cross-shareholdings. They have CEO and president lunch clubs every Friday where they bring in a guest speaker or they go behind closed doors and figure out how they can collaborate. They're organized around common assets, a bank, real estate, insurance. They share management and engineering talent across companies. And these companies like Mitsubishi, Matsushita, Sumitomo, like these giant corporations, right? And you're like, wait, but they don't do that. No, that's their ethos. So you go, well, let's reimagine this for startups. Like, why wouldn't I be able to scale if I had the power of a pack? And that was really the motivation, because it's like, we're wolves hunting unicorns, and that's the way I think of it. So it's like, well, we don't have to just be small or gigantic. We can get here, but a different path. And I think that you'll still attract money if you have traction. And I think that's just the reality of it. Then it's up to you how you take on money. And I think most VCs, it's weird. Like sometimes it's like they want to see traction. Otherwise, they just want to see a broad vision, right? So it just depends who you're taking money from. I think you start with the premise of, I'm going to go out in the world and hunt for customers and hunt for partners and hunt for investors. And I'm going to gather resources and I'm just going to eat what I kill. But at the same time, part of it might be I need money to scale, right? I've proven a model, and if I have money, then I'm going to be more efficient with it. And that's kind of the approach I took with that. That was kind of like the ethos that I wanted to put out in the world, because I want to attract those types of people. I want those people to be a part of Founders Pack, which is our group of pre-seed and seed stage startups. And I want everybody to think of, yeah, like we all want to get that status, but if we don't, it shouldn't be the end of the world necessarily. I might still build something that somebody loves and it might grow.
And I think we'll take a break right there.
Yeah.
We'll come back. We'll talk about how we can form our packs to take down those unicorns.
Cool.
Hey everyone, Daran Herrman here with some exciting news. We are launching my startup, Real Market, and what we do is we match home buyers and sellers together with real estate agents, all through the power of video. Basically, you can just answer a couple questions, and then you get to see a video pitch by a realtor. If you think you could connect with them, you get the live video chat with them right then and there. If you don't, then swipe just like a fun Tinder or dating app. Swipe, swipe, swipe until you find a realtor that you think you want to chat with. And this all happens from the comfort of your couch or your home and within minutes. Thank you so much to join me in this journey. If you can, go to realmarket.com, play with the tool, try to break it, and provide any feedback as possible. Even the rough feedback, that actually is the most helpful because it helps us build the best tool possible so that we can completely revolutionize how and why people hire a real estate agent.
If you were starting a company, and so we have the book, obviously, Form Your Own Pack. Do you prefer solopreneur, or grabbing a couple co-founders, or like what's your advice there?
So the premise of Form Your Own Pack is that we use this example we use two examples. The first we say is evolutionary wise, or evolutionary from that perspective. Humans are made and have succeeded because of our ability to cooperate at scale. And the other characteristic is we build stuff to solve problems, so we can amplify that cooperation. And then the Keiretsu is a proof of you can build these giant companies and run them with cooperation still at the core. So then really informing your own pack, it's to define that for yourself. And so we use other examples of startups that mirror characteristics of the Keiretsu, but all of it starts with not generally one person. It's usually a small group of people. I don't think you can do stuff by committee necessarily. You need a singular vision. And then you figure out who's in my pack. What are the characteristics of the people closest to me?
Right.
And I think of it kind of as concentric circles, right? You talk about co-founders, like we need diverse skill sets. That's really what you need. You need someone that can do something you can't do. So that's why you look at like Y Combinator. Usually there's a technical co-founder and then someone else. They're either a product or business or CRO type person, right? Chief Revenue Officer. But there's always a developer because they're investing in technology businesses. So I think what you need to do is like your own inventory. And we kind of talk about this that says like, who's in my pack? Who are the core people? And then, who would be good partners? And then who is my community? And then what's the mission? Like what's the vision of the future and what's the mission and who we picking a fight with?
Well, and I think there's a lot there that it's so obvious to have a community around you and look at like, what do you dislike? What are you not good at? And I feel like we skip that, right? We just get on our own island.
True. Absolutely.
And maybe it's because we're trying to hoard our knowledge or something. I don't know what it is. But the thing is, especially like a podcast is great because we're all like, yeah, we will give away all of our secrets for you. And guess what? We want to do it.
Yeah.
We're excited to. If somebody reaches out to me, I always say yes to talk to them, as long as I know that they're serious. So I kind of make them book the meeting and stuff like that, just to make sure that they're going to go not just one message in. But it's like, most people, if you just ask for advice, they'll probably give it to you or what they've done.
True.
Now, one of the reasons why I created my podcast a long time ago was I just felt like this was a better ask than say, hey, let's go get coffee. Was, hey, let's spend an hour talking to each other and
meet
maybe
people, learn from them.
Yeah, and we'll probably create a stronger connection together. And I actually looked at the podcast more to serve my guests and become tighter, kind of knit with the guests than actually the audience. And I figured the audience would benefit on either way.
Yep. Agreed.
But okay, let's say, all right, we decide we're not going to be on our lonely island, which is very common, and I've been there. How do you go find a co-founder?
Yeah, very good question. And on the lonely part, like we talk about this idea of a lone wolf. And on the outside, it seems like a really like sexy sort of thing. It's a lone wolf. They're a rebel. But if you look at wolves, 15% of wolves are lone wolves, and they struggle. And they usually leave the pack for the wrong reasons. They usually, because they can't get along with the pack, they fight for the pack. Sometimes it's to go find a mate. But they'll go out in the world, and if they can't form their own pack, they'll come back to their natal pack. So I think that's the other thing to think of. Like wolves show that you can take down big prey that are bigger than you in a group. And that's kind of one of the major themes. So that's the first part. To figure out who's in your pack, and I kind of talk about a lot of these ideas, I think you think of, first of all, your mastermind. And it's like, well, here's how I see the world. And we have a whole chapter on predicting the future for your pack. And then you think of, what are your expectations from someone that's in that close circle to you versus someone that's a partner or someone that's in your community and might be as a customer? Because those people are the ones you're going to spend the most time with. And that's gotta be really dialed in. And I think you have to have that, you have to write it out almost if that's good for you, right? Like where you say, why am I partnering with someone that's, a co-founder? What skills do they have that I don't? What are my expectations of them? This is what I'll deliver. And you have to have that ability to have those heavy danger conversations about it beforehand. and you have to assess, like, this is what I expect communication style, and this is what I expect effort-wise. Because a lot of partnerships, if you will, or companies blow up because you're working harder than I am.
Sure.
And well, we didn't talk about it.
Or you have more equity than I have.
Or you have more equity, but you're not, I have more equity, but I'm doing more. Or I started it and you're bringing it in, right? And those are all challenges. So if you don't talk about those basic things of, well, what are your expectations? What's your contribution? And then a way to at least talk about it and communicate about it, it ain't going to work.
So a couple questions on that, and we can go all day probably on this, but
Probably,
I love this because it's something that I recently just did. I just did a co-founder. We just literally, I don't know, a month ago, 2 months ago, actually finally signed the docs and all that.
Okay, yeah.
But we met 10, 15 times, maybe 20
great.
beforehand I meet with multiple people too, but and I think I did all of this well, but one of the things, okay, I met with him. I figured all this stuff out, figured out what I'm going to do, what they're going to do, expectations were aligned. How do you actually establish what somebody should get equity wise? Do you have any recommendations there?
It's tough. I mean, the closer you are in equity to each other, obviously seems fair. But, if the other person's not delivering what you expect, then that's a problem. And those are adult conversations that can be painful and can result in problems, right? So it just depends how you've started the company, I guess. That's part of it. It's like, did you start it and you're bringing someone in? That's always interesting, right? So that's gives you kind of like, this is my idea. I've built some stuff. I have some customers. Or is it just an idea phase? So I think if you got to think of how far in you are. And then there's always money, like who's contributing what. So money is a factor, right? If it's just straight up, like you look at, I like the example of, we tell people not to write business plans. We say do a 2-day startup for yourself and you recruit your team, you start working on a problem and you build a prototype and you go talk to customers, investors, like in that 2 days. That'll tell you a lot of things. This happens a lot too in YC, right? YC, or that just 2-day thing is the first test of, can we work together? Mm-hmm. Do I feel good about this? Are we getting stuff done? And then you go, okay, well, if you pass that gauntlet, do a 6-week accelerator for yourself. Like,
so you like accelerators?
Well, I like the concept of rapidly working on something and doing a 2-week check-in, right? There's organizations called accelerators that you have to evaluate if you should be a part of them, but you could do it yourself,
Sure.
right? You could build in public. Here's our 2-week goals. That's what YC is, right? YC is a 90-day program. You get some money, but it's really, if you read, and I talk about the YC community, like it's about the community and it's about getting customers and support and it's about bouncing ideas off people, but it's also about accountability. So if you're a person that can set up your own accountability, do a 6-week accelerator of your business idea or business, right? And every 2 weeks you have goals. You tell why you did not meet those goals. And at the end of 6 weeks, you say, is this the team? Is this the opportunity? Is this the product?
And that's what's great about that is you do that sprint. So then you didn't spend 6 months and been like, oh, now I'm like, now I'm in, like I'm committed now, like, cause I've been 6 months and I've been talking about it for 6 months. If you do just, a few weeks, and
totally
got a lot done and then like, I hate this. I think you can drop it easier.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of ego gets wrapped up in all these things too. So is there any rules that you say I don't do about partnerships? Like that you've had some problems or something and you're like, no, don't ever do that.
Actually, it's funny. You're bringing up parts of the book that I'm remembering. And I was talking to Sydney, who hopefully we'll get to talk to as well, who's here with me, and he's visiting Austin and we came up together. So I was saying, Sydney, there's this one thing called the dark triad. I don't know if you know what the dark triad is. So there's a test that you can measure narcissism and Machiavellism in. And I say screen for the dark triad. That's one thing. It sounds weird, but you can literally go on and everybody should do that or a similar test. I think that one's really interesting because you'll find out if you're dealing with people that are devious and that people that, think highly of themselves but don't necessarily deliver. And I think that'll tell you a lot. So that's one way you can do it. I talk about an example, and I distinctly remember the heading, which is don't cut off somebody's finger. However, the Yakuza are an interesting example because they have many tests of loyalty to get to the next level. And the ultimate is, well, you're accepted in, you now have to give up a finger, right? So I'm saying that's extreme, but use it as an example, which is, well, what are the tests to evaluate this? And it might be more conversation, might be more outcome, might be more effort, but you have to have a way to say what you're happy with at the end of the day. This is not someone that I will work with. And I think that's why I say like make it your own, but here's some great examples and things that I would absolutely screen for. These are non-negotiables and negotiables for me. And I think you have to come up with your own list.
Yeah. And that makes sense too, because sometimes we just move forward without the plan without talking in those ways, but you're almost having uncomfortable conversations in a very safe environment almost because there's nothing on the line.
Yeah, true.
It gets
harder the more there's on the line, right?
And then the companies start, like for instance, if somebody might want to buy you or you continue on your own, like you want to probably know who your partner is before that time. So it's like dating, right?
Well, it's harder. You're spending more time usually with your co-founders than you are with a spouse or a girlfriend.
Right.
And that usually impacts those relationships. Right. So, and that's like, you probably put more effort into finding a date than you do a co-founder.
Sure.
So like, I'm not in that world, but I mean, if you think back, you probably, you're scrambling around and you're scouting and and then you're evaluating. You're here or you're here, or you just fall in with someone and then you have a disaster, right?
Wow, and that happens a lot too. Yeah, right. I think there's a lot of parallels there. Yeah,
and don't just use a word. Oh, be mindful or purposeful. No, let's be systematic.
Sure.
Let's talk about what let's again, you have to. Your imagination's more and more important, and I think in the same thing, you have to imagine what this 3 years we have a $10 million exit. Or 3 years and everything falls apart. What's the relationship with those co-founders? And I think you got to really think through that. I use a bunch of examples in the book, and there's a whole chapter. There's 7 examples of modern day packs and how they mirror characteristics of the Keiretsu, but also have their own characteristics that are really unique. The one I didn't use is coming to my mind. So is BlackBerry. And I worked there a very brief time. Yeah, RIM at the time was what it was. But there's a movie that is out, and it's very kind of dark humory. And I kind of knew those guys. Like I had first, I knew what Mike and Jim were like. And it worked for a very specific reason. It worked because they had rules. Like what was really strange was when you would walk into RIM's early office, Mike and Jim shared the boardroom as their office. And I remember Jim coming, hey, how you doing? Who are you here to see? Which is really strange, right? But so like people don't see that in that movie, but that was how they were co-CEOs. Mike was the technical product guy and Jim was the business guy. And they let each other operate in those domains and they respected it. And they wouldn't go into meetings together, by the way. It's like, no, you can have one of us. Well, because you can never corner them on decisions and you can never get them to argue, especially not in front of people. So they had rules, right? And that was what flashed to my head. I didn't really write about that.
Yeah, right. It's interesting though. I think some of those to actually explicitly have those, because we develop them whether you want to or not. But can you do it consciously, or
you're not
does it
talking
just happen?
about, you're not thinking about, you're not writing it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that, that works wonderful for your personal relationship too. I'm a big plan. Like, let's get some stuff out there about like, what do you like to do? What do you dislike to do? Even just chores around the house. You can rate, like take 30 chores and rate it. And if yours is really low and theirs is really high, like then maybe that's your task. Yeah. Like if you don't mind doing the dishes and then your spouse hates it, maybe you're the dish person.
Yeah,
now.
I get it.
So
totally. The other one that is in the book that I think is, I don't go super deep into it. There's a great book called The Founders, and it's by Jimmy Soni, and I reference it in the book. And the thing that Jimmy pointed out about the PayPal mafia, because he had firsthand view, like he was talking to Elon, David Sachs, he was talking to these guys directly and interviewed them in the book. There was never one hero or heroine, like there was never one central personality to PayPal, which was really weird.
Right.
But they all had at the core a friendship and a respect for each other's roles. And that was very weird because most of the other examples, there was someone that saved the company or someone that had the singular vision. They were unique, and they still are to this day, that they cooperated in such a way that at various points in the company, they were facing catastrophe. And it was someone different almost every time that pulled something out of a hat to save PayPal. And it was really a unique example. And I highly recommend that book. For like Jimmy's a great writer, and he did amazing research on that. But it was such a weird thing because every other example you looked at, it's like, well, there's Steve Jobs,
right?
And then there's Steve Wozniak,
they're
right?
a main business person, main technical person.
Over here, like like Microsoft, it was Bill Gates, and then there was Ballmer, and then there was Paul Allen, right? But there was Gates, right? But there it was like, no, we're just going to make this work together. So they were kind of interesting, and they were kind of unique.
So let's talk about your next 5 years from now. What do you see that you're going to be doing, or what's your 5-year plan?
So in March 2021, I wrote myself a little plan for artificial ventures. And so this is obviously before like all this GPT stuff and ChatGPT blew up. But I think it's really cool that stuff's happening because it kind of enables a lot of what I was envisioning. And what I said for myself was, as much as I want to function inside of a role or a job, that's never really been my thing. And my power has always been my ability to create things. I'm not necessarily good at these other things, but I want to create an infrastructure where I can either build or invest in one of these 5 categories. So what those were at the time, I defined them as: 1 was SaaS that's being replaced by AI. 2 were decision support engines driven by AI. 3 was data-driven AI. 4 was something I call Valet. And the idea behind Valet was, why am I going on the internet? Why am I operating in the world as an individual? Why don't I have this, AI that manages my life through a series of LLCs and does all this stuff for me, and I never have to go out vulnerable in the world, and I can just tell it the outcome and it does the thing? And then the final one was educate AI, but that's not ed tech. That's giving mass customized education to everybody to disintermediate, cabals of education, cartels, textbook cartels,
Right.
school cartels. And the only thing that public education has over, you see people going when they're under pressure and they're forcing agendas down people's throats, at least in America, I think Canada too, probably. And I'm sure other countries, they're homeschooling people, right? But you don't have buildings and you don't necessarily have babysitting, and they have access to your bank account. So if you can give people curriculum and we solve for those other problems, everybody can get free, great education that you say that your kids should have. So I'm interested in anything around that. That's what I consider educate AI, is anything that delivers, understands you, and then delivers an education you want, and then validates to the world that you have it.
Well, on the education piece, and I don't want to get too deep in this because, again, that could be a whole podcast on its own. I have a 2-year-old and a 5-week-old. So I'm, thinking about this.
5 weeks. Geez,
yeah.
Lord, man.
Yeah. Right there.
4-year-old,
Yeah.
25. So.
Sleep is here and there,
Overrated.
but overrated. No, very underrated. I will disagree.
You're able to operate on no sleep.
That's not me. But, and I grew up extremely poor, extreme in the sense of America, extreme, of course, we had food and stuff because there's programs for that. And then I'm like, one, what adversity will my sons have?
Sure.
It's going to be way different than me. And then two, I'm like, well, I live in Austin, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if I want to send him to entrepreneurial school at 6 years old, they have that.
And it's good.
It's good. Well, but that's an opportunity that not everyone has.
It should be though, right? It should be mass customized. It
Right.
shouldn't be a cabal that locks
Only
down
people
the
that
lowest
have...
common denominator and an agenda that is people that have not taken risks, people that have not built things, people that look at adversity as A, B, or C, not, oh, that didn't work, let me try something else, right? That doesn't espouse your values. It's not even just being an entrepreneur, it's being like a gritty, dynamic person that survives chaos.
Or just focusing on what you're good at as opposed to doing kind of an industrial revolutionized
spread it out.
Schooling system where we all sit down and shut up. Yeah, right.
Shut up. Oh, you have a disease called ADHD that you can't define except you need this drug.
Because you're bored.
You're bored.
Super bored.
And you're going home and you're playing games that are teaching you faster.
Well, right. And but what's fun is with the internet, for me at least, it was the great equalizer. Because now
that's great.
I had a chance to basically to build anything that anybody could buy.
Yes,
I got that's why I got in e-commerce. I could sell in my little town in Kansas to somebody in Europe, whatever. And that what got real exciting. And also, if I wanted to learn something, I could just learn it on my own. But not, of course, that's also still very difficult at times to do. But the excitement of what I assume what you're saying is, let's take that to a completely next level and maybe operationalize it somewhat to where somebody could do it as, as a young kid, not just as a teenager. Or
what are we waiting
adult.
18 years for?
Right.
That's crazy, right?
Or stopping after 18 years too. That's the crazy part too.
You spent 18 years to get to the Final Four to get your accreditation, which people have less and less faith in because it's not really that great.
Right.
But you're starting your life with unforgivable debt. You're a serf to a system that is self-washing, and people are cluing into that. So what's the alternative? Well, people are doing this homeschool thing and they know their kids educated. Does everybody else know?
Right.
And
how do we validate that? Yeah,
exactly.
And the programming world has figured this out, and I feel like that usually shows us what the future is.
Yeah,
it's like, let's just great, fine, but let's see what you can do.
Yeah,
let's test it.
Right, but so then, that's what I see. Educate AI is people need to start building platforms that do a couple of things. One, deliver mass customized education, where it's like self-learning is super powerful on YouTube. How do I know what you've learned on YouTube? How do I know what you've learned, by, what you can do, like your skills? I look at your LinkedIn resume that you might be lying on, and I have no idea what you've consumed. I don't know what books you've read. I don't know how much you've retained, none of that, right? So why wouldn't there be a wallet called Super Educated, where it's a soul-bound tokens that you get from stuff you learn? It might be micro-learning, it might be volunteerism, it might be something you started and the lessons you learned from it, and it's been validated by someone else that you did it. Why wouldn't it be, papers you've published or books you've written or journeys you've been on. And so I think, I want to see people build that.
That's interesting. Of course, there's be some negativities in that system as well. But basically what you're saying is it's kind of like almost a video game. Let's see all the little tokens you've gotten, all the little icons, all the little achievements that you've unlocked.
That's
kind of fun.
That's the truth.
It's actually quite fun too.
Right?
Kids would love that too.
Oh my God. Everybody would love
that.
it. Adults love that. Adults do that because it's like we're spending 23 years to get out of this regimented system. And then it's like, I learned more from YouTube in 6 weeks. Okay. But how do you validate that? There should be validation. Instead, what we're doing is we have this other system and all they have is a stamp, right? There may or may not be great education there. And people, they justify it by saying, but it's the people I met, or it's the parties I went to, or it's the experience I got as a result, or it's the doors that it opened being at USC or Harvard or Cornell or whatever it is, right? Well, let's disintermediate that. I'm interested in that. That to me is educate AI.
Yeah, I love it. I think there's something definitely there, and also could be and people sniff at people making money, but it could be a very profitable business too.
Why not?
Because, I'm a big fan of that. And it could be a nonprofit profitable business because corporations figure out how to do the same thing over and over and better. Whereas a lot of times nonprofits have a tough time with that because you have to rate it somehow. You have to keep it going. Got to keep it. Energy
it could
to
be,
it.
Daran, the most valid use of blockchain technology ever.
That could be really cool,
right? Like that's what it should be on. This is this to me is this is the use of that technology stack that's been co-opted and taken in this weird, almost like Ponzi scheme that conversation with crypto.
Yeah, sure.
But it's a valid technology if applied, and the tools have not really evolved so that's mass. I think first of all, AI can make blockchain valid. Hey, make me a contract on the blockchain. Okay. How do you do that today? I don't know. You got to program it. It's crazy.
There's something I always say though too. Not even more about the programming is like the contract thing. We're gonna look back and be like, okay, so you bought a $500,000 house, and they believed you because you scribbled on a piece of paper.
Correct.
And there wasn't 13 independent computers that verified it and date stamped it. I think we're gonna it'll be kind of like
that's why it's valid technology but not being applied, right? And I think the potential of AI is to take that and apply it to real things, because otherwise right now it's a bunch of Java and it's a non-scalable network.
Well, that's just early too.
It's shouldn't be early. It's 10 years in, right? It's been co-opted by the wrong thing in a sense, right?
Well, I think anytime you have a monetary engine on something that that people can grab early and people don't understand, I think that's what happens. But internet took a long time. FM radio took a long time from AM radio. I mean, I think it would just take a while to actually.
It took like 3 weeks to get 100 million.
Yeah.
So we're not in the long game, right? It's like we can fix this now.
Yeah,
and it's not that I'm I just say that is a valid use of that technology stack.
Yeah. Well,
that
it's very opportunity
really cool
for somebody
one.
out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious about seeing that out in the world. But anyways, that's what I see. And then, I have a friend of mine, Van Latham, who actually gave me really great early feedback on Form Your Own Pack. Once we were at dinner and he drew a circle. It was a Venn diagram. And he said, Michael's these 3 things: author, tech guy, and hockey.
Nice.
So my side hustle is in hockey as a chief scout for a major junior hockey team.
Oh, fun.
I've been in hockey for a very long time. And actually, if you're here, well, we're in Austin, but if you're in Nashville, where I live, a player that I got to coach, I don't say I did anything for him other than I was blessed with coaching him for 1 year in various circumstances, is actually signed with the Nashville Predators. So
wow.
It's like crazy watching him. I'm like, listen, guys, I had nothing to do with that.
Right,
I was a chauffeur. He was already at a certain level, but I got to observe what greatness is at a certain point in time before like 15 to a 32-year-old guy that's won the Stanley Cup. And so that's really weird and neat, but that's kind of cool. But, and I only bring that up because it's just an incredible experience that can't be duplicated with technology or anything else. Right. It's just like, it's this other animal. And there's, I think, what sports can do for us. So I think that Venn diagram of Van Lathan is still valid, right? It's
Mhm.
like author, tech guy, and then hockey.
But and why author? Like why write this book? Why write the first book? Wherever you want to take it.
Selfish reasons.
As most of our decisions are.
In a sense, and maybe that's not true, but Automate and Grow was a way to codify what I was doing every day around solving problems. It was a formula in my head that wasn't expressed, because I would go into companies that had technology or wanted to build technology or had bought technology and it was a mess, or it was going to be a mess. And it was just saying, listen, these are 4 things you need to think about. Do these, 2-page questionnaires that probably turn into a lot more than that, but the answers to these questions before you buy or build technology, or if you have, here's how you fix it, because it'll be very clear when you have a customer success roadmap, you have a traffic and conversion plan, you have a sales playbook, and a product plan. So it was selfish in the sense of I was like, this is how I think, and you guys should do this too. I'm not making this up. And so in that sense, it codified what I was doing, and it made it very, very clear. And it made possible, if anybody reads that, they could do it themselves. Not a perfect book, but it was perfect to solve, stuff that we're spending money and time on. The second book with Form Your Own Pack was in part inspired by the Keiretsu. And it blew my mind that people didn't know what the Keiretsu really was. And because I thought and when you go research it, it's really kind of crazy, because it came out of World War II Japan that was in radioactive ruin after World War II. And it evolved, and it was part of the economic miracle of Japan that happened. And I think there's really good lessons, because now we know they have tough times for some of those characteristics, but they've also achieved outside success in a lot of ways. And I just thought we could learn from it. So selfishly, I was saying, listen, I want to attract people that think the same way. Yes, we compete, but we also have to have our own pack. We have to have our own version of the Keiretsu. And here's a bunch of examples to prove it. And here's how you do it yourself. So in a sense, it was like a flag of, come over here if you think this or you'd like any part of this, and I'll help you in your startup journey, because I want to help 1 million people start some sort of a scalable venture. And I think you can scale not just with money, but through having your own pack. That's really what I say. So it's selfish in the sense, because I don't want to hang around with everybody.
Yeah, sure.
Right? I want to hang out with a certain type of person.
Yeah, that's all.
So I'm
all
kind
of
of
us,
saying,
yeah,
right,
absolutely. My biggest,
let's get on this page.
the best compliment I can give you is if you're interesting to me, that's it. That's the highest level.
Good point.
Is, are you interesting? What's your biggest recommendation to actually writing a book? And I'll give you a preface a little bit. So I've started writing a book.
Yeah, okay.
About 2 years ago, right? Before my first son was born, I was trying to get it done before he did. Got 200 and some pages in. I want it to be a shorter book. And so it has a lot of cutting. So it's
200 pages in?
Yeah, but a lot of it's fluff that will be cut. But
how many pages do you think this is?
200 probably.
206.
206, yeah.
But you know how many it is in a Google Doc?
No.
160.
Oh, interesting. So mine was Google Doc.
Because when you format it into 6x9, it becomes 200 plus.
Yeah. And my thought was I was just getting everything out there, and then I would probably cut a ton of it, right? As what happens. But then priorities, there's so many things.
Sure.
And a book is one of those things is just like a startup or just like anything, there's no really reason that you have to finish it, unless, of course, you've signed a contract, all that.
Yeah.
So what happened for me is something had to give, and that was the easiest thing to give. And to be honest with you, the longer I go, it actually will get better, because a part of it was based upon this podcast and finding kind of,
awesome.
interesting things of okay, these 7 things is what 25 or 50 people have said about fundraising.
Amazing.
And just kind of keeping going with that. But so every podcast I do makes the book better. But how do you actually get from idea to completing it?
Great question. Okay, so I just said the first book I wrote, I gave it to myself for my birthday.
Oh, that's great. Having an end goal.
Right. And I said, my birthday is August 15th. It was July 2017 or something. Yeah, sounds right. And I said, for the next 30 days, I'm going to write 5 pages a day. It'll be 150 pages, but that'll be a 200-page book. And that's why I bring up the math. and I'm not going to evaluate anything I write. And then what I started with was I said, here's the outline, here's the chapters and their names. And that's all, that's what I started with. And that, maybe that was a day or whatever, right? And then, the other day I would just like pick, I wrote an introduction. It might have not been great. It probably wasn't even the final. I can't remember. And I kind of I repeated this exact same process the second time. So I write the outline, and then I'm picking chapters, and I'm just, no matter what, brute force doing 5 pages a day. So at the end of the 30 days, it sucks some days. It's really painful. And maybe it only takes an hour or 2 hours or whatever, but your brain is just like, jelly, right? And then, and what you cannot do is evaluate what you've written. You have to be in a trusting mindset, not a training mindset, right? In a training mindset, you're evaluating yourself.
You're auditing. Constantly.
You're not editing, right?
Yeah.
You're not editing yet. You're not at that phase. You need bulk. So in your case, you've written 200 words. If it's in the structure that you believe is the right structure, and maybe you switch little things around. Yeah. So you give yourself permission, and that's the first thing. Then, you might have a bit of a break. A couple of things that I found are really helpful. You have your trusted people that you think, I would like to know their opinion on this. And when you're, sometimes you're not ready for that, but you give it to them anyway. And some people will edit it for you, right? They'll just like, no, this is messed up, or this is terrible. And spelling and grammar are a lot easier now with Grammarly or whatever you decide to use. So that's the first thing. You need a bulk thing.
Oh, just keep going. Don't worry about it. Okay. Just leave it.
You need the bulk, which you have, it sounds like. And then you got to go back and you got to go through the painful thing of reading what you wrote and changing it, which sucks, right?
I saw you just posted about you were doing your audiobook. And you're like, oh my God.
I want to rewrite that little part.
That's probably a great way is to read it out loud too.
I was just going to say that. So then what you do is you read it. And when you read it, the best thing to do is make changes on the spot, right? But read it into a recording. It's not that you're even going to listen to it. Right. It's that something about the act of reading it, you're in the mindset of the reader at that point, and you can clean it up. You can add stuff. It's like, I got to write something else, or there's not a good bridge. This is really choppy, whatever your standard is. And then I think you just have to, in the back of your mind, know, hey, if I write 200 pages in Google Docs, that might be a 280 to 320 page book. So I have enough, because you want it to be a weighty tome. You want fine leather-bound book in your hand.
Yeah, sure.
So there's a weird thing about feel. Like I see people write little booklets, and you're like, okay.
There'd be no value there.
Right. And then when I saw people like holding the book up on camera, I was like, God, that looks thin.
Yeah, even that one.
I'm like, I gotta get the hardcover done.
Yeah, sure.
So that's really my process to do that. You can send it to someone to edit. I had a couple people that edited some chapters. They don't always get your voice, and the first book, there's a lot. I should really go back and rewrite it for a bunch of reasons, or just not totally rewrite it, but re-edit it. But it was, at some point I just said, I picked a launch date.
Ship it.
You got to ship it. And that's what we talk about, perfectly imperfect.
I mean, this whole thing has actually been very similar to your advice on starting a company is, come out with your structure, your plan. What do you want it to be? Your outline, project plan, whatever you want to call it. Go and then do a sprint on it. Develop a team of people to help you along the way. Provide feedback. And then there's a bunch of other steps there, and then launch, which obviously is, doing a podcast run, doing a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
But then you gotta promote it. Otherwise, nobody's gonna read it.
Honestly, that was my biggest problem, Daran. I didn't want to promote it because I had my first.
Nobody does. Nobody wants to promote. They don't even want to promote their own business a lot of times.
You're like, me.
Come just buy it. You find it yourself and buy it. Yeah. Nobody's gonna do that. Nobody's gonna do it.
So it's like, I think Robert Kiyosaki said it. He was talking to someone in one of his books, and they said, "What? I'm like the best writer. Like, how are you so successful?" He goes, "I'm the best selling writer." It's like, okay, I got to shift modes again. It's time to shift seasons. Yes. And that was always my, my thing. I'm like, I'm gonna have to go on these podcasts. I'm gonna have to do all these book launch events. And that was kind of my dread. I kind of procrastinated, like, no, just do it. And I picked a wacky date. I picked October 31st. So I'm just gonna do it on Halloween.
Sure.
It's not gonna be perfect, but when I read it, I'm doing the Audible, as I mentioned on social media the other day. I'm like, oh, this chapter 5 is way better than I realized. I was like, oh, well, this is actually pretty darn good. I like this, which is the highest compliment you can pay yourself, because usually you're punishing yourself, right?
Yeah.
But I think reading it really, really helps. And then the promotion part, I don't have a perfect system. I think we're seeing people that have success with ads to funnel to upsell. So I know we're going to have to implement that. The Audible book is going to be important to get out. It's delayed just because, you write it, you get it formatted by someone. Shout out to the person that formatted it. I forgot. She was off of Fiverr. I'll get her name and we
Yeah,
can
we'll
put it in the show notes.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Because
Because I'd love to have that. Yeah, especially
She's
a freelancer.
awesome.
Yeah.
Oh my God, she did such a, and she was a referral from another person.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, I saw their sample compared to 6 years ago. What was on there?
Yeah.
Like total pro, man.
Yeah.
Holy
pro.
smokes, amazing job. So shout out to her, which I'll put her link
absolutely.
in. And then the cover design was by Elena, who's a longtime collaborator of mine on UI, UX, designed Opps.ai, designed a bunch of other software for my teams on projects over the years and did an amazing job.
So if you take yourself back to maybe like, I don't know, high school days, or you were saying you have a nephew that's like 16 or something.
Yeah, 15, 16.
What
14,
advice
15.
What advice would you give yourself or perhaps your nephew?
Hold Apple. If I just held that early Apple stock and then hold my Tesla stock. That's what I would have done.
Right.
I mean, did fine on them, but it would have been just hold it longer. And it's funny. Like, I think when I was that age, I was trying to start stuff and did start stuff, and some things didn't work, right? And sometimes you just think you want the outcome. And I'm a type of person where I see A to Z, but the details for a long time would elude me. And I'm like, why is nothing happening? Well, you're not doing the B, C, D, E, F to get there. So when I say like automate and grow and then form your own pack, we're selfish. I think that's advice to my younger self. I think it's advice to, and to my nephews. It's here's how to come up with your own systems, because you're not going to be happy copying someone else. Other people are great with that. I'm terrible. Like I hated coloring books as a kid, just hated them. But if you gave me blank paper, I would draw all day long. So do you prefer coloring books or do you prefer blank paper? And the outcome is okay. And just ask yourself, it's not really time to quit, is it? Just keep asking yourself that, because a lot of times we quit things and then someone else does it. And it's just because they kept going. And I think that there's a lot of people to tell you no, and it's not possible, and they're wrong. And sometimes you're on, like that's why we talk about vision in the book a little bit, like have a common vision for your pack. Just know, is the vision right? And there might be timing might be wrong. Like I used the General Magic example, right? They built the Magic Leap 7 years too soon, 7 years before BlackBerry, right? But that operating system, you know what happened with it? Well, I won't give it away, but you're using it. I just have bad news for you. And what did they benefit from? None of it.
Yeah.
They went out of business. But there's 2 other giant corporations right now that benefited from the people that were in that lab and the things they built. So don't be that. Just give yourself some runway, be patient, stick to your vision and keep building stuff and have fun with it. It's not always going to be fun. And that's not a reason to quit. And I think I think that's the most important thing. Like it's, trust yourself. There's a lot of no's. They're probably wrong. And, set your own standard of that. And it's okay to have different projects and try to move towards them. So if I had to, I think that would be it. It would just, stick with your vision, keep working on stuff. And if you get good at forecasting, someone else is going to do it if you don't.
And this is my last question. I end every podcast with this question. It's, how would you like to be remembered?
Oh my God. I don't know. It's a great question. I'm not interested in, I guess what I'm mostly interested in is ideas. I'm interested in turning, the creative act of business is what actually is probably interesting to me. So I think it would just be that, I had led an interesting life and I tried interesting things and that I built some cool stuff that maybe has legacy or maybe doesn't, but I gave other people permission to, try and build things. And maybe you're way more successful than I am in what you did. And if I helped you, I talk about it at the beginning, actually, of the book. It's kind of interesting where I had this feedback from a friend early on. He goes, I see you as the Sherpa in this story. I'm like, that's a really interesting thing to say. Because if you think about it, a Sherpa, when you climb Mount Everest, the Sherpa climbs too. The Sherpa climbs way more than the person that reaches Mount Everest. But nobody ever puts the Sherpa on the cover of a magazine. But that's, if you look at the odds of getting to the top of the mountain without a Sherpa, first of all, you have a 20% chance of dying. But then there's two categories. Without a Sherpa, you have a 19% chance of reaching the summit. With a Sherpa, it's 56%. So, but I think it's okay because you still made the summit. You don't have to be the lone wolf going up the mountain. And if I can just be a Sherpa to people on their startup journey of starting cool stuff, I'm going to build my stuff and hopefully people support that. But I want to help like 1 million people do the same thing. And I think that's what I would like to be remembered for. And for some really good scouting and hockey.
Yeah, sounds like you already got that one covered. Well, Michael, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the Establishing Your Empire podcast. I really appreciate it.
Excited. This is great. I'm glad we finally got to do it.
Absolutely. Cheers.